Since a very young age, I have always been a dreamer. I saw myself as part of a fairy tale, where adulthood would be marked by moments of constant happiness, where love would be the foundation of everything. During my teenage years, I would spend hours imagining the future, creating stories about what awaited me. In those moments, I saw myself married with children, living in a cozy home, surrounded by love and harmony. But at the same time, I couldn't fully understand what that meant. For me, I wanted to be the best version of myself, but what exactly that involved, I didn't know. The idea of becoming a mother had always been my greatest dream. I observed the women around me, those who managed to balance their careers, the upkeep of their homes, and still seemed so fulfilled, so accomplished. To me, that represented the ultimate fulfillment. The desire to become a mother wasn't just the desire to have a child, but to have a complete family, a solid foundation where love and security prevailed. I thought that by achieving this, my life would have meaning and balance. For a long time, I became obsessed with the idea of being the person who would support others, who would take care of the children, the husband, the house, and everyone around me. My worth was in giving myself to others, in being the pillar for everyone, in ensuring that those I loved were doing well. I believed this was my mission, my life's purpose. I always felt happiest when I was doing things for others. No matter how much I sacrificed, as long as those I loved were well, everything was right. As I grew older, this idealization of family life accompanied me. I believed that deep down, love and harmony were all I needed to be happy. Adulthood would be a continuation of that dream, with a perfect marriage, beautiful and healthy children, and a simple life, but full of joy. I didn't realize that behind this romantic vision, there would be challenges I couldn't foresee, and that often true love wouldn't be enough to deal with the difficulties of life. When I found out I was pregnant with John, something changed within me. It was as if the world had hit pause. In a matter of seconds, my life, my identity, everything I knew transformed. I was no longer Sarah, the single and independent woman. Now I was Sarah, the future mother. The idea of becoming a mother, something I had always imagined, became real and tangible. At that moment, an unconditional love was born within me. I felt overwhelmed by a strength I didn't know existed. My heart was ready to give itself completely to this new phase of life. Pregnancy was a transformative process. I felt more connected to myself, to my body, and to the little life growing inside me. I knew it would be a difficult journey, but I also knew that the reward would be indescribable. My son, John, represented the realization of the dream I had carried since my youth. I saw myself as the devoted mother, the one who would protect, guide, and love without measure. He would be my world, and then the moment arrived. John was born. I remember as if it were yesterday, the feeling of having him in my arms for the first time. The love I felt was so deep, so visceral, that it felt like my heart would explode with emotion. I was in ecstasy, as if nothing else mattered. John was mine, and that filled every corner of my being. It was pure love, beyond explanation. The little being I had carried inside me was now here, in my arms, with those curious little eyes watching me. I knew that my life would never be the same. No matter what happened, John would be my priority. I would do anything for him, ensure that he had everything I didn't have, and give him all the opportunities life had offered me. That was my commitment, and I was willing to pay any price for it. I knew motherhood wouldn't be easy, but the desire to be the best mother possible for John was stronger than any challenge that might arise. In the early days, I was completely dedicated to him. With every smile, every small progress, like his first look of recognition, the first sound he made, my happiness seemed to grow in indescribable proportions. I lived and breathed for him, and every second by his side felt magical. But soon, I realized that being a mother wasn't just about love and joy. As the days passed, I began to realize the difficulties involved in this new phase. I was starting to lose myself. The young dreamer I had been before John, with my own dreams and personal ambitions, seemed to be fading away. I was willing to give up everything for him, and often that meant neglecting my own needs. I didn't mind. My only focus was him. I got lost in diapers, feedings, sleepless nights. There was no time for my dreams, for my friendships, or even for leisure moments. I was living for and by John, but at a certain point, I began to question whether this devotion was making me distant from myself. I had to learn to balance all of this, but for now, the only feeling I knew was the overwhelming love I had for my son. John's first few years were, without a doubt, the most intense of my life. Each day was an emotional roller coaster, a mixture of joy, fear, exhaustion, and above all, love. As a first-time mother, I was completely immersed in this new world. The sleepless nights, the feedings, the diapers, the smiles and the cries, everything seemed so natural, yet so overwhelming. I knew it was all part of the journey, that the price of a mother's love would be high, but what I didn't expect was how much it could consume me in a silent way, to the point that I almost lost myself completely. From the start, I threw myself, body and soul, into motherhood. John was the center of my universe. Every little progress he made, every new word, every step he took, filled me with indescribable joy. It was as if, by watching my child grow and develop, I was also growing. But at the same time, I began to realize that my own life, my own desires, were being left behind. Deep down, I knew my identity was changing. Slowly, I was no longer Sarah, the woman full of dreams and plans, but John's mom. I remember the conversations with my friends when I tried, with a forced smile, to explain how my life was going. The answer was always the same: taking care of John. And that was it. I didn't know what to do with myself anymore, what my desires were, what my goals were. When someone asked me about my personal plans, my answer was vague, without enthusiasm. I didn't have time to think about myself. I was consumed by everything that came with being a mother. My routine revolved around him, his needs, his care, his well-being. The world seemed to revolve around John, and I was completely absorbed in it. As time went by, the sense of losing my identity grew stronger. Every sacrifice I made for him seemed, at first, like a conscious and loving choice. I believed that this was my role, that being a mother meant giving myself completely. But little by little, the sacrifices began to take a toll. I was so focused on being the perfect mother, always present and attentive, that I started ignoring my own needs. When I felt tired or overwhelmed, I just pushed through without stopping to think about myself. I believed that all of this was part of the process, that by being a mother, my life would be entirely dedicated to John. Being a mother, to me, meant not just taking care of a child. It meant being the supermom, the woman who handled everything. The housework, the career, John's upbringing, the social life. I wanted to be the best, the strongest, the most attentive. But as time passed, I began to realize that the supermom I was trying so hard to be was wearing me out. The physical exhaustion became more evident, but it was the emotional toll that weighed the most. I was losing myself in the roles I had assigned to myself. Deep down, I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't identify what it was. The only thing I knew was that I was feeling more and more distant from myself. And then John's adolescence came. The first sign that things were changing was when he started seeking more independence. Gradually, he pulled away, becoming more reserved, and as a mother, I didn't know what to do with this. I had always been in control, always knew what he needed, But now with adolescence, he didn't need me as much. He was seeking his own identity, his own paths, and I didn't know how to handle this change. The idea that John would become an independent young man with his own opinions, friends, and life left me completely lost. The close relationship we had for so many years was slipping away, and I, who had always been at the center of his life, no longer knew what my role was. I was feeling more and more invisible to him, and that hurt in a way I couldn't express. I felt excluded, as if my purpose as a mother had come to an end, or at least had changed in a way I couldn't keep up with. The bond we shared was loosening. Before, I knew what to do in every situation. I knew when he needed comfort, when he needed guidance, when he just needed me by his side. But now, I didn't know what he wanted anymore, and that made me anxious and insecure. He was no longer the baby who depended on me for everything. He was a teenager searching for his own way. And at the same time, I was asking myself who I was in this new scenario. Where was my identity? What had I become? Motherhood had been, until then, the center of my existence. John was my reason for being, my daily motivation. But with his change of phase, I found myself facing a reality I had never imagined. How would I adjust to this new dynamic? How could I be the mother of a teenager while also trying to rediscover a little bit of myself? I found myself in a whirlwind of emotions, trying to deal with this transition, not knowing where to go or what to do. What I didn't realize at the time was that this crisis was deeper than I thought. The loss of myself, the abandonment. That day seemed to have been planned as the culmination of my role as a mother. The great moment of transition when my son would become a man and life would continue its course. But instead of being a moment of pride and happiness, it was a painful reminder of how much things had changed and how I was no longer as present in his life as I once was. Somehow, John's wedding was the final step of a journey I wasn't prepared to face. I didn't know exactly when the transition began, but in that moment, I realized that he was no longer the little boy I had raised with so much love. He was now a man, and that made me question who I was. At the ceremony, I watched from a distance, as if I were in a parallel reality. John was radiant in a moment that, for him, was the happiest of his life, surrounded by friends, family, and a bride, who seemed to be the woman of his dreams. He was in his element, but to me, he seemed distant, as if he were living a story that no longer belonged to me. There was something immense in his happiness, but also a subtle pain, something I couldn't clearly define. The smile he gave to his bride was genuine, full of love, and that smile made me realize that I was no longer the most important person in his life. The emptiness inside me expanded, and it was almost impossible to ignore it. I was there, in my corner, trying to understand the emotions that were mixing within me. On one hand, there was pride in seeing him become a man, someone capable of taking this big step. But on the other hand, there was a deep sadness, as if I were losing not just my son, but a part of myself. I had dedicated my life to him, and now he was taking such a big step that it seemed to push him away from me. It wasn't just the wedding itself, but the symbolism of that moment. John was creating a new life, and I, in a way, was being left behind. At the reception, I was placed at an isolated table away from everyone. That, in itself, wasn't a surprise, but how I felt about it took me by surprise. I found myself watching others dance, laugh, and have fun while I sat there, almost invisible, trying to disguise the loneliness that consumed me. There was no longer any space for me in that environment, for my identity as a mother, for my relationship with my son. Everything seemed to have changed, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't adapt to the new reality. My mind got lost in a mix of contradictory emotions. I knew I should be happy for John, that I should be celebrating his future, but instead, I felt an immense sadness, a sense of emptiness that grew with each passing minute. It was as if, on that day, I had finally recognized what had been lost over the years. I no longer knew who I was, and most painfully, I no longer knew my place in his life. All I knew was that that moment, which should have been mine too, no longer belonged to me. John's wedding, which should have been a milestone of celebration, became a reflection of loss. I was watching my son, my only son, drift away from me, and with him, a part of who I was. That wedding was, in fact, my confrontation with reality. John's life was moving forward, and mine, in some way, was standing still, as if I had been stuck in the past, in that phase of the devoted and self-sacrificing mother. But now, before the altar, the bride, the promises, and my son's happiness, I realized that there was no longer room for my role as a mother as I had known it. John was becoming a man with his own family, and I didn't know how to position myself in this new scenario. The pain didn't come from him getting married, but from the emptiness I felt from not knowing what my role in his life would be going forward. The wedding was, for me, a painful revelation. I was no longer the central person in John's life, no longer the mother who guided his steps, who was by his side in every moment. I had given everything of myself, and he had grown, and that was natural, but that didn't ease the pain I felt. I was losing my identity, and more than that, I was losing my connection with him. It was a gradual process, but on that day, it became very clear. John's wedding was the turning point, the moment when I realized that the phase of being the central mother in his life was over, and now he was building his own path with his own family. That night was long, and I found myself isolated again, with my own conflicting thoughts and feelings. As John's wedding became another memory of what had been, I began to reflect on what was truly important to me. I knew that the pain I felt was legitimate, but I also knew that I had to look forward, to find a new purpose. Life couldn't just be about what I had lost, but about what I still had to achieve. But in that moment, I didn't know how to begin. The emptiness was still there, and the journey to rediscover myself seemed harder than I ever imagined. This reception was full of laughter and lively conversations, but to me, everything felt distant. The voices, the music playing in the background, the celebration of John's new phase in life. All of this was happening around me, but I felt like a silent spectator. When the last words of the ceremony were spoken and the main course was served, I found myself in a corner of the house, alone in the kitchen. It was a refuge I hadn't sought, but at that moment it seemed necessary. The warmth of the kitchen contrasted with the cold emptiness inside me. I was surrounded by friends and family, all cheerful, but in that instant, the only place I could hide was there. It was there, in that unexpected solitude, that something inside me began to clear. It was as if a window opened in my mind, and I could finally see the truth I had been avoiding for so long. I had always known that I had lost myself, but I had never fully understood how much it affected me until that moment. The realization was hard to accept. I had lived my whole life for others. Every decision I made, every step I took, was for others. I lived for John, for him, and for a long time, that seemed enough. But the truth was that I had neglected myself, set aside who I was, my own dreams and needs, to be the perfect mother. For a moment, I felt a tight knot in my throat. It was hard to look back and see how much of myself I had left behind. But at the same time, a sense of relief began to form within me. I didn't need anyone's approval for what I had done for John. A mother's love, care, and devotion didn't depend on recognition. He didn't need to thank me for everything I did because a mother's love is unconditional. I had done everything for him because deep down, that had always been my greatest wish, to see my son happy and safe. But at the same time, I realized that this love could no longer be the sole foundation of my identity. I was losing myself, and in doing so, I was also losing the ability to be a whole mother. To be the best mother to John, I needed to be the best version of myself, and that meant I needed space to be who I truly was, without guilt, without barriers, without limitations. The decision I made in that kitchen wasn't just about me, it was also about my son. I wanted to be a more balanced, happier, and whole mother. And to do that, I needed to recover what had been forgotten over the years. That night, with all its contradictions and complex emotions, became the starting point for a new journey. A journey of self-discovery, of reconnecting with my passions, my interests, with the woman I truly was. I didn't know exactly how I would start this journey or what steps would be needed, but I knew I had already taken the first one. I was no longer willing to live my life only for others. I knew that the love I gave John would never be in vain, but I also knew that the love for myself needed to be revived. And that night, as I looked at myself in the kitchen mirror, I saw a woman determined to change her story. I was no longer Sarah, the self-sacrificing mother, but Sarah, the woman who was seeking her own happiness, who wanted to finally be whole again. I was ready to start over, to find a new reason to smile, to live. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in many years, I felt a spark of hope, and it was that hope that propelled me to take the next step toward a new phase in my life. The path I walked since that moment in the kitchen was long and full of ups and downs, but when I look back, I can clearly see that it was the most important journey of my life. I started with small steps, simple, almost imperceptible to others, but huge for me. It was as if I were rediscovering the world, or maybe rediscovering myself, who had for so long been forgotten in a dark corner of my soul. The first step was something I never imagined doing, going to an art exhibition alone. The idea seemed strange and even frightening, but somehow I felt I needed to experience it. That day, among the paintings and sculptures, I discovered a new pleasure I didn't even know I had. Art, with its colors and shapes, seemed to speak to me in a deep way. I was there, in the middle of that creative environment, and I realized how much my life had lacked something so simple, but so essential. Time for myself, for my own discoveries, and for my own feelings. The exhibition was a revelation. I realized that for a long time, I had neglected my own soul. When I returned home, my mind full of new ideas and emotions, I decided that I wouldn't be the kind of person who only settled for routine. I needed more. I needed to reconnect with the small, things that made me feel alive. I started buying books that I had put aside for years. Philosophy books, literature, stories that made me travel to unknown worlds. In the midst of my dusty bookshelf, I found the same books that had always fascinated me, but that I had never been able to focus on due to my responsibilities as a mother. I began reading every day, in silence, in the quiet of my home. Each page turned was a small victory, a small reminder of who I was before I was just Sarah, the mother. I also started practicing yoga. At first I was skeptical, thinking it would be difficult and that my body wouldn't keep up. But surprisingly, yoga brought me a sense of peace I had never experienced before. With every breath, every movement, I felt a connection to my body, a connection I had neglected for so many years. Yoga wasn't just about physical stretching, but also about stretching the soul, about allowing myself to be more flexible, both physically and emotionally. In addition to yoga, I began walking in the mornings. The simple act of walking without hurry, feeling the fresh air and nature around me, became one of my greatest therapies. During these walks, I had plenty of time to reflect. Reflections on my life, the choices I made, what I wanted for my future. In the solitude of these walks, I realized that I never wanted to feel so lost again, so disconnected from who I truly am. Little by little, I started taking care of myself in ways I never had before. I began eating more balanced meals, dressing in a way that made me feel good about myself. I took care of my skin, my mind, and my body. It was like I was learning to love myself again, something I had neglected for a long time. But of course, the healing process wasn't immediate. It wasn't a straight line without obstacles. There were many days when I felt insecure, when doubts flooded my mind. Was I being selfish for putting myself first? Would John, my son, understand? I knew he needed me in a different way now, that he was growing up and that my relationship with him would change. This left me with a sense of emptiness, as if I was losing something that could never be replaced. As time passed, I began to realize that this process of rediscovery didn't mean I was no longer a mother. On the contrary, it meant I was becoming a better mother, a more balanced, healthier, and happier mother. I could be a mother in a new way, more present in my own life, without losing my essence as a woman. A mother's love didn't disappear, but it evolved. I no longer needed to be the mother who constantly sacrificed herself, who always put herself second. I could be the mother who was in tune with herself, who could give her child not only love, but also the example of a woman who knows how to care for herself and her own dreams. The relationship with John changed, but not in a negative way. He now saw a more confident, more independent mother, one who supported him, but also supported herself. I realized that the love I had for him didn't have to depend on my unmet needs. I could love him in a healthier, more mature way without losing myself. It was a long and often painful process. But looking at myself now, I see that the woman I am today is more complete, more whole. I am not just a mother. I am Sarah, and that is enough. The journey of rediscovery hasn't ended, but now, when I look to the future, I feel a peace that once seemed impossible. I found the strength within myself, a strength that has always been there, but that I had ignored. Now I am ready to live my life fully with the love of a mother, but also with love for myself. And that, perhaps, is the greatest victory of all. Life, with its peculiar way of surprising us, had one more revelation in store for me. I wasn't prepared for what was to come. But as so often in life, the truth would come to light when we least expected it. And when it did, it was wrapped in a letter, a simple letter. But the impact it would have on my life would be profound, almost immeasurable. The envelope, white and without marks of any other destination except for my name, arrived on an ordinary morning. I was at home, taking care of my daily tasks, already immersed in the changes I was beginning to make in my life. I was calm, but when I opened that envelope, a sense of discomfort filled my stomach. The words printed on the letter were clear and direct. John was not my biological son. There was no beating around the bush, no ambiguity. The letter said what needed to be said without mercy. Those words echoed in my mind for a long time. My heart tightened immediately. How? How had I not known this? How was I able to create a life alongside him, to love him with the intensity of a blood bond, without even knowing the truth behind his origin? For a moment I felt the ground beneath me waver, as if the earth were giving way, and I was about to fall into an abyss. My mind was confused, my vision blurry. What did this mean? Everything I had lived until now seemed like a great deception, a lie built on a foundation that was now crumbling before me. But then, as the shock of the revelation began to fade, something strange happened. A feeling of liberation began to take over me. The pain of the discovery was replaced by something gentler, something deeper. It wasn't that the truth didn't affect me. It did, and strongly. But as I allowed myself to reflect on it, a certainty emerged in my heart. What mattered now wasn't the blood, it wasn't the biology. What truly mattered was what I felt for John, what he meant to me. He was and always would be my son. I saw him grow, saw his achievements and his stumbles, saw his smile light up my days. I loved him with an intensity that transcended any definition. The love I had for him wasn't conditioned by a piece of paper. It didn't depend on genetic information. The love I had for John was real, pure, and unconditional. That couldn't be changed by a simple revelation. I looked to the side where John was and realized something even deeper. He didn't need to know about that letter. He already knew. He knew we were mother and son, not by a blood bond, but by what we shared in our hearts. It didn't matter what the letter said about his biological origin. He had always been my son, and most importantly, I had always been his mother. The role I played in his life wasn't tied to him being biologically mine, but to the love I gave him from the moment I met him. He grew with my presence, with my care, with my protection and guidance. So why did this revelation, which initially brought so much discomfort and pain, now give me a sense of freedom? Perhaps it was because I finally realized that love doesn't need justification. Love is simple, pure, without explanation. Our relationship was never about genetics or biology. It was always about affection, trust, mutual support. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I didn't need to hold on to a stigma or a preconceived idea about what defines a mother or a child. What I felt for John was real, and that was enough. He was my son in all the ways that truly mattered. The rest, the biology, the genetics, was irrelevant. That letter, which at first seemed to shake my world, actually gave me the freedom to be even more myself. There was no longer a need to hold on to conventions or what others thought about what a family should be. I had created a bond with John that was stronger than any paternity test or biological evidence. I knew what we had was real, and that was enough. The revelation that John wasn't my biological son didn't diminish the love I felt for him. On the contrary, it only strengthened it. I knew that this love was unconditional and that the true essence of motherhood lay in what we are to each other, in what we share throughout life, in the experiences that shape our relationship. I knew that in my heart, he would always be my son, just as I would always be his mother. The pain I felt at first when reading those cold and distant words in the letter was overcome by the certainty that regardless of everything, John was my son. And that, however simple it seemed, was what set me free. I didn't need more proof or explanations. The love we had for each other spoke for itself. The truth about his biological origin changed nothing. John would always be my son, and nothing, no one, could take that away from me. I loved him, and at that moment I knew that was the only thing that truly mattered. Now looking back, I see a woman who in many moments lost herself, but also found the strength to rise again. The journey wasn't easy, and at times it seemed impossible to continue. There was pain, confusion, moments of despair, but there were also discoveries, learning, and growth. Today, I can look at myself and see a woman who has risen from her own ashes, stronger, more authentic, more whole. I am a mother, yes, and I always will be. The love I have for John is something that transcends any explanation, any definition. He is my son, not because biology says so, but because he occupies an immense place in my heart. And nothing, not even the revelations of the past, can change that. However, something very important happened along this journey of self-discovery. I am not just a mother. I am Sarah. And I finally understood that in order to be the best mother I can be, I need to be the best version of myself. For so many years, I had lived for others, always putting John's needs, everyone else's needs, above my own. However, I learned that in order to give the best of myself to others, I first needed to give the best to myself. I needed to return to being Sarah, with all my dreams, passions, and essence intact. I began living for myself again. I began dreaming again. I reconnected with what made me happy, with what gave me purpose and joy. Those little things I had neglected before, like books, art, moments of silence to meditate, time spent with myself, became vital to my soul. I reclaimed parts of myself that had been dormant for so long, and in doing so, I felt like I was becoming a more complete version of who I truly am. Today, I am a renewed woman, and for me, that is the greatest gift of all. I now know that happiness doesn't come from meeting others' expectations or seeking external validation. It comes from within, from the peace found when we allow ourselves to be who we truly are, without fear of making mistakes, without fear of failing, but also without fear of shining. Being Sarah again, without losing the mother I've always been, was a process of balance. I was able to learn to love John in a healthier, fuller, more balanced way. I could be the mother he needed, but also the woman I needed to be. And in this balance, I found my true strength. Life has taught me that it is possible to start over, even when it seems too late. The truth I feared to face was, in fact, the key to my freedom. Discovering that I don't need external approval, that a mother's love doesn't depend on blood ties, was a liberating revelation. It allowed me to finally be myself. I am Sarah, and that is enough. The greatest gift I could give myself was rediscovering who I am. Living for myself again, being Sarah again, was the key to true happiness. Today, I know I can be the best mother to John because I am, first and foremost, the best version of myself. And that is, without a doubt, the greatest gift I can offer to myself and to him.